So in this video, we're going to cover your rights in private rented. It's part of Icon's housing series. So you might ask, what are my rights as a tenant in private rented and how can I find them? So if you go to Google, type in Residential Tenancies Act, you'll see the main piece of legislation was devised in 2004, and there's been a number of amendments to the Residential Tenancies Act since then. But rather than you looking through a kind of really jargon piece of legislation, this video we've condensed your rights in kind of quite accessible, easy to understand English. So we get straight into it. One of your first rights is that you have exclusive occupation or privacy of your home. And that means that your landlord can't enter your home without permission. You have a right to privacy in that regard. If a landlord was to come and carry out any repairs or anything like that, or if they wanted to inspect the property, they have to pre-arrange it with yourself, unless it's in emergency circumstances. So say, for example, if there was a leak in the house that they needed emergency access to. Other than that, you have exclusive occupation of the property and the landlord can't come in without your permission or without it being pre-arranged. Another right that you have is in terms of the standard of accommodation. So there are certain minimum standards that private rented accommodations have to meet, and the landlord has to maintain the accommodation to a certain standard. The landlord will also have to provide for some basic amenities as well. We will be covering minimum standards of accommodation in the next video. And under this right, if you pay for anything in the house, any repairs that the landlord has responsibility for, you would be entitled to get your money back there. So say, for example, the washing machine breaks and you ask the landlord to fix it and it's 2 weeks down the line and it still hasn't been fixed. Once you've notified the landlord, you are within your rights to go and get that appliance fixed. And then you can essentially send the receipt or a copy of the receipt to the landlord and ask for your money back. So that's a really important thing to note. Another right is that you must be provided with a rent book or lease. So normally in the rent book or a lease, it kind of details the rent that you have to pay. It will also document how much of a deposit is held on the property and any other payments that are made by you in relation to your tenancy. Threshold and the RTB have kind of templates of what a rent book looks like, and if your landlord hasn't given you one, or your question maybe about your lease or whatever, that you haven't seen these documents, get in contact with your landlord and tell them to supply you with one. Another right that you have is for the correct contact information for your landlord or nominated letting agency. Now that's not to be calling them at 2-3 o'clock in the morning. They say that you kind of have the right to contact at a reasonable time. So it's usually kind of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday office hours. It's usually the rent book or the lease that contains that contact information. And under the Residential Tenancies Act, if your landlord wants to increase your rent, you have a right to be notified 90 days prior to the rent review. And there are rules in terms of how often rent can be increased and by how much. So, for example, off the kind of cusp, there are things called rent pressure zones, which they're like little designated zones in usually highly inflated areas, and they're only allowed to be put up by 4%. But we'll cover rent increases maybe in a separate video as well, just so that you guys have a better understanding in terms of how to appeal or how to maybe redress a rent review that maybe isn't correct. Another right that you have is to a valid notice of termination. So we've covered terminations before in a different video, and it depends on the length of your tenancy, but you have basically a certain amount of time in which you must be notified that the tenancy is coming to an end. So like under your rights in the Residential Tenancies Act, you're entitled to a valid notice of termination that also gives the appropriate termination date or termination notice. And lastly, then you have the right to refer a dispute to the RTB, and that is without being penalised for doing so. And this is an option for recourse that is open to tenants and landlords, and you should not have any negative, any kind of negative impact for taking a case to the RTB. So other resources that are available to tenants, and we always end on this, these are good organisations to get in contact with if you have any questions in relation to your tenancy. That's ourselves, Icon there, we're a community organisation based in Dublin 1, and we specialise in, I guess, information on private rented and also for homeless accommodation and council houses as well. We've got Citizens Information, Mercy Law, Free Legal Aid, Threshold, and CATU, Community and Tenants Union. And these are our details here. Icon, Inner City Organisations Network, our email address, and our office contact number. So if you have any further questions in relation to your tenancy, or if you would like more information on this video, please get in contact with us.